Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another live stream. Welcome to another live stream Message Vibe podcast. And today I'm joined by Dr. Nicholas Peter Lee Allen. And today we're going to be continuing our discussion from where we left off last time on the Shroud of Turin and how it was created in the 14th century CE. So, Nicholas, thank you for joining me today.
It's an absolute pleasure being here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. And of course, I want to remind everyone to get Nicholas's book, Turin Shroud, Testament to a Lost Technology. The link to purchase the book will be in the description below. We will be taking questions today, but again, only from Super Chat questions, so make sure to Super Chat your question if you want it answered. Okay, Nicholas, I have your PowerPoint on the screen, so take it away.
Well, you ask me a question and I will clarify. Because basically, I have all the information I presented last time, and I can go into more detail now if you require it. So if there's something you need to know about, I can try and answer you.
Let's talk about Pierre Darcy's. That's something we didn't touch on last time. Pierre Darcy's apparently wrote something around 1389 in which he states that they apparently found and convicted the fraudster that created the shroud.
Right. There is a letter in the National Library of France in Paris, the Bibliothèque Nationale de Paris, which is not written by Pierre Darcy, who was the Archbishop of Tours. It is possibly written by a clerk who copied his letter, but this letter is genuine and it is an accurate transcript of what he sent to the anti-pope. And as I explained last time, at this time there were at least two popes, the Pope in Rome, and then you had an anti-pope. And at this time it was Clement VII. Now Clement VII was related to Jean de Vergy, who was the wife of Geoffroy I de Charny, the man who purportedly owned the shroud at Legh around about 1351, 1352. We know that he made a little wooden church in Legh. And of course, as you know, he was killed at the Battle of Poitiers in 1356 when he was 50 years old. And his son, also called Geoffrey de Charny, so we call him Geoffrey II de Charny, started exhibiting this cloth in this little church. We're not sure when those exhibitions started, but the letter from Pierre Darcy, which was written very late, I think it was in about 1389, something like that. Don't quote me on that, but right at the end of the 14th century. In fact, a few years before Geoffroy II de Charny died, he died just before the end of the century. And the letter tells us that there were exhibitions in Legh for quite a while. And of course, I think the viewers must also remember that we're talking about the end of the 100 Years' War. This is a very, very interesting period of history for the French. For basically 100 years and more, you've got the French and the English fighting each other. The French are having a very bad time. After the Battle of Poitiers, the countryside was being laid waste. It was really a very unpleasant time to be alive. And one suspects that the de Charny Vergy family were using the shroud to raise money, basically to keep themselves going at this time. The pilgrimage to Legh, according to this letter, must have been quite big. And the Pierre Darcy's biggest problem is that he is in charge of the cathedral, which is the seat of the bishop, in Tours. And Tours is, as I said last time, it takes you about an hour and a half by car today to drive to Legh from Tours. And he's losing pilgrimages. And that's why he's really writing this letter. He's losing money. That's the bottom line. And so obviously he's trying to accuse Jean de Vergy and Geoffroy de Charny of fraud, because that will strengthen his case. He's trying to get the Pope to ban the exhibitions. And in the letter, he makes mention of that it's known that this cloth was painted, which is a very strange comment. He also mentions that miraculous cures have been claimed on the cloth. Just leave it there. Anything else you need to know about?
So do you think the comment about it being painted might have to do with the blood being painted?
No. Remember, the people at this time had no idea what this was. It's been, as I showed you last time, the images of the cloth, it looks like, to somebody who's living in the Middle Ages, this would have appeared like a sweat stain on a piece of old cloth. The blood, it would have been assumed by then that the blood came off of Christ's body in the positions of the stigmata. So they would have seen it in their time as a very important relic. And I go even further and say that this would have been the next best thing to being in the presence of Christ himself, because what you have here is a piece, an artifact that's, from their perspective, touched the body of the Savior. And on this cloth is his actual sweat and the blood that saved the world from sin. So it's a very powerful relic. I mean, you just got to think about this for a moment. This is, if you think of the Eucharist, just as a side issue, the Eucharist, which became very popular from 1250 onwards with the rise of humanism, where the priest is able to make on the altar a relic, if you like, by magical means. He takes bread and wine and he turns them into the body and blood of the Savior on the altar. So that piece of bread and that wine is transformed through transubstantiation, through the process of the Mass. It becomes an actual relic. It becomes the body of Christ and the blood of the actual blood of Christ. That's what they believed. They didn't see it as a symbol. They saw it as the real thing. So the shroud, which comes from this period, this is a post-1250 period, exhibits all those qualities. It's visual in the sense that it's an image, and it also contains the physical aspects that relate it to the dead Christ, well, now the risen Christ. Does that make sense?
Yes.
What else can I tell you?
So the next thing I'd like to ask you about is there have been several comments on the last video, and some of them were curious to know how you would respond to the late Barry Schwartz's response to the camera obscura argument, because they were bringing up Barry Schwartz's article, which they think refuted the camera obscura argument.
The problem is, I mean, I don't want this to become personal, but Barry was a Jew, and he was so convinced by the Shroud's authenticity that he changed his religious belief. And that's already a very dangerous thing, in my opinion, because you're not being objective. He was the official photographer for the Shroud of Turin research project. And because he was photographing for, say, I don't know, 80 hours over a 5-day period, he assumes that somehow makes him the most authoritative person on the planet to talk about the Shroud, because he was with it so long. And I mean, I respect the fact that he was with the Shroud for 5 days, but I mean, it's like saying, well, if you've been living on Mount, what I'm trying to think now, Mount Everest, say, your whole life, That doesn't mean that you understand how mountains are formed. I mean, being in the presence of the shroud doesn't give you authority to say that you know now this is what it is. And when I first started dealing with Barry Schwartz, he was very negative. He didn't want to hear anything other than that the shroud was a miracle. So it was very difficult to actually deal with him objectively. I've got nothing against him. I have great respect for him, but he's not a scientist. And a few years ago, they took one of my shroud images without telling me, and they gave it to Barry, and they asked him to comment on it. And apparently he said to the people that it was very similar to what he had observed in Turin. And that was the last I ever heard of it. Barry also was a photography lecturer many, many years ago, and he actually wrote, before I started my work, that it is impossible to make a picture of a human being life-size using a camera. And I found that very amusing, because that's exactly what I did when I made the first shroud in Port Elizabeth in South Africa. It is possible to make a full-size human being life-size with this particular technique. Obviously, if you're going to use modern photography, which is a different topic, where you are making a latent image, and I don't know if people understand this because people now are into digital cameras, but in the old days, we used to make an image with colloidal silver, and the image was latent. In other words, it was an instant exposure, but you couldn't see anything on the piece of light-sensitive material. That light-sensitive material had to be placed inside a darkroom, and it had to be developed with chemicals to enhance the invisible image so that the image became visible. Then that image was fixed. That means to stop it from reacting chemically. And that image was a negative of what had been photographed. Then you had to take another photograph of the negative in the darkroom and go through the same process until you produced a positive. And obviously, to produce a modern photograph, you would need a really huge camera using that system. But the Shroud of Turin is not a normal photograph, as I've tried to explain. It's not made using the latent image technique. It is rather a very slow, long exposure over many days, in some cases, where the sun is moving over the object that's being photographed, in this case, a human figure, and it is illuminating aspects of that figure over a period of 8 hours from morning to afternoon, such that in the morning, the one side of the body is more illuminated than the other. At midday, the top of the head and the top of the nose and the top of the lips are more exposed. And then in the afternoon, the other side of the body gets the treatment. And that causes over several hours for the image to be, and I'm using this word very loosely here, burnt in to the cloth at a certain depth. As the silver is excited by the radiation from the sun, it releases electrons, and the electrons obviously damage the cloth. This is a very slow process. It's like a very slow scorch produced chemically over a long time. And that is why the final image is not like a modern photograph. The final image is more like a relief, if I can say that. It's like a very low relief. And if you enhance it with a computer, you can see the form of the original object that made that image. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Mm.
Now, another thing that they'll say, some of the Shroud believers will say about it. I'm speaking about some of the comments in general, not specifically about the late Barry Schwartz now, is that none of the chemicals or other stuff that would be involved in the camera obscura argument that you make, I'm saying what they're saying, is actually found on the shroud. So they try to dismiss your argument by saying that they don't find the stuff on the shroud.
If they actually read the articles, and there are many of them, they should understand. Of course, there's not going to be anything on the shroud, because what's left on the shroud is the record of where the silver had been. So it's a process. So first you have silver, which, as I explained, was an ion when it's mixed with the salt. So silver nitrate or silver sulfate is contains silver ions, which means it has an extra electron in the orbit around the neutrons, around the nucleus. And when light, which comes through the crystal lens, affects that chemical, that molecule, the electron that is given off damages the polymer in the fiber, in the linen fiber. Now, when the exposure is finished and I have the image that I want, what I have, in fact, are two images. One that I can see and one that I cannot see. The one on top is the silver image, and the one underneath is the damaged linen structure that's been affected by what happened to the silver. So when I remove all the silver, there's nothing left. The cloth has nothing on it. There's no dye, stain, powder, nothing. It's just linen. But the linen has a record of where the silver had been. People don't understand this because they're not chemists. The linen itself, as I explained, is damaged. The polymers are shorter, and the short polymers give a different wavelength of light. That's why it appears darker. And if you burn something, for example, put an iron on a shirt or a piece of linen, you will notice that the linen will go brown over time. A newspaper left out for years will go brown because it's oxidizing. And this is exactly what's happening on the shroud. The shroud is basically oxidized linen, if that makes sense. It's oxidized where the silver had originally reduced. When I say reduced, it's because it lost an electron in the process. Now, it's possible that if you examine the shroud with modern X-ray fluorescence, that you should find silver on it, parts probably per billion, and there will be evidence of that. But they haven't done that test. That's the other problem. And now the church owns the shroud. There's another thing people don't know is that after Umberto II, King of Italy, died, he left it to the church, which means he doesn't own it anymore. Now the church owns it. And the very first thing they did when they owned it is give it a vacuum. They basically gave it a spring clean, vacuumed it, straightened it out, and claimed that they were just preserving it better. It's really what they did was make sure that no more archaeological investigation can be taken on the cloth, because particles now have been removed from it by vacuum. Fortunately for me, though, it doesn't affect my silver, because the silver they will never get out. They will still find parts per billion. I'm quite sure of it, if anybody bothers to do the test.
So I'd like to get back to where you left off at the end, specifically at the end when we were talking about when you were going further into the camera obscura argument and what you were saying after that.
Okay, what exactly do you want me to speak about? You want me to go over the process that I used to make an image? All right. Let's go and have a look. All right. Well, as I explained, if you're looking at this objectively, you have to leave your religious beliefs at the door of the laboratory. They have no place in science. I've been asked by people also, this is a very common question I get. They say, if you're right, how come there's no other example of the shroud? Very common question. And you look at them in disbelief, because you think, well, What are they getting at? The shroud exists, okay? It's a real thing. It's not a fake in the sense that it's a real object. It's a real phenomenon. And the shroud tells you how it was made. It's a negative image. You can't make a photographic negative image unless you're using photography. There's just no other way of doing it. So here we have a shroud image behaving like a photographic negative. And as I explained, photographs are made by photographic related technologies. And when I talk about photographic related technologies, that includes mirrors, any means of trying to capture an image and project it onto a surface that has been prepared with a light sensitive emulsion or chemical. And how light sensitive emulsions work, and they normally are silver based, is that the silver reacts to the presence of light. In modern photography, as I explained, you cannot see that reaction with your naked eye. Only a few atoms are affected. So the piece of paper, say in the camera, would look still white after the exposure. But if you put it into a developer, you can increase the number of atoms of silver, and they grow basically like a crystal over the surface of the paper, and it looks like an image. The way I try to raticinate what was used on the Shroud of Turin is a completely different process. When I first thought about this, I like everybody else, I would have said, oh, well, this is ridiculous because they didn't have cameras and they didn't have photographs in the Middle Ages. But as I explained, they did. Okay? Everything that you need, they had. The only thing that we don't have any evidence for is image fixing techniques. Everything else we have. Light sensitive chemicals, as I explained, have been around. Well, Al-Jaber knew about them in the 9th century, and there's a very interesting text written by Albertus Magnus in 1200 and something, where he talks about how after playing around with silver sulfate, his fingers went brown. So we know there's an actual record of somebody in the Middle Ages explaining that the chemical is changing color. As for lenses, they go way back. I just want to quickly shoot forward. I'll talk about lenses just now. Let's just quickly look at the camera obscura. The camera obscura has been known for millennia. In the Islamic world, it's been known since about the 9th century. This particular drawing that I put here is a modern rendering of something that Al-Hatham would have understood. He writes and records how he used candles opposite a pinhole, and he records how the candle was upside down inside the camera. He's also, as I explained before, the first man that we know of to understand that light travels in straight lines. And that's a very important step forward in science. The Greeks, for example, didn't know that. They thought that light merged and mingled. And in fact, what's very amusing is that the Muslims, the Islamic world, the scientists of their world studied the human eye. They tried to understand how images were formed in the eye. And the Christian West spent about 300 years trying to disprove what the Islamic world had created, because they couldn't understand how an image could be upside down when obviously as a human being, when you look at objects, they look like they are the right way up with your eye. Now, of course, they didn't understand that the brain takes the upside down image and turns it around, so to speak, so that you perceive reality being the right way up. They thought that the eye was kind of like, I'm trying to think how I put this in modern parlance. They thought that the eye shot light beams out and grabbed the object that they were beholding and then pulled them back into the eye. if that makes any sense to you. And because they knew the image was the right way up, they explained that the aqueous humor in the eye, the liquid in the eye, actually turned the image the other way around. And as I say, it took them 300 years trying to disprove Islamic science, and they got it wrong. The Muslims were correct. And the Al-Thumb is, in fact, the man that we should be respecting here, because he was the person who first discovered it. Later, I mean, during the Renaissance, for example, this was common stuff. I mean, people like Leonardo da Vinci, this was old hat. But I'm trying to find evidence of this in the century before Leonardo da Vinci. I'm trying to find evidence of this in the late 13th and early 14th century. So, as I explained, if you have a camera obscura, which is just a fancy word for a dark room, in the wall or the window or whatever you've boarded up, you just need a hole. And the image will be a multiplicity of those holes. So whatever is outside illuminated by sunlight will produce an inverted image inside the room, and it will be blurred. If you make the hole smaller and go towards a pinhole, the image will become sharper, focused. But there's a problem. When you make the hole smaller, not enough light gets inside the camera, which means it's very, very dim. To give you some understanding of that, it would be like f100 if you understand photographic terminology. It would be incredibly dark. And you need light. But if you open the hole up, you get a blur. You don't want a blur. So what they realized was if you put a lens into that hole, you can have lots of light going into the camera, and you can have a sharp, focused image at the same time. And quite frankly, this is a self-working phenomenon. You just need a biconvex lens, and you can try it yourself. It's very easy. And this is a drawing based on Al-Thumb's work. As you can see, it's late 10th, early 11th century. And lenses go way back. They found them in Troy, Knossos in Iraq. As I did explain, I've actually got a mold of a lens here, which I got from the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford, which was made in Iraq. And it looks like it's about 500 BCE, and it could easily have been used for a primitive telescope. And these lenses here from Tanis are plano-convex. That means that they're flat on one side and convex on the other. And if you put two of them together in a tube, you basically are making, what would you call it in photography? I think they call it a condenser tube. It basically projects an image. These were found in the house of an artist in Egypt. And obviously the artist was using these lenses to magnify what he was trying to engrave. The other amazing thing is that spectacles, which we take for granted today, they were only invented around about 1275. The first ones I know of are from Genoa. This is a picture of one from Pisa, Italy. They were made out of crystal, and they basically magnified. That's all they did. Very primitive. But this is, as you can see from the dates, this is basically the time the shroud was being made. I would put the shroud's manufacture between 1275 and, well, 1290, because it was around in up to say about 1350. It was available in 1350, so it had to have been made in those years. This is a crystal ball from the 6th century, 7th century. So even at this early stage, they had the technology to make a round shape. And as you get more advanced, and now we're going into the 1200s, you can see they were able to carve and hollow out a hollow object in quartz, which is incredibly difficult. I mean, I think quartz is about 7 on the hardness scale. 7 to 8, where diamond is 10. So it's very hard stuff. This one here, which comes right at the end, or I'd say in the middle of the Italo-Byzantine period, the piece of crystal has been so well carved that they've made a container in the center to put the relic of the dead saint, and it's even got little handles, all beautifully carved and polished. And here's a whole room full of these. Some of these are later than the 12th century, but some of them date back that far. And as I explained, I have seen some of these in Venice where there are flutings on the outside, and each flute is a biconvex lens, elongated, so that you can magnify what's inside the container. So making a lens is really a piece of cake if you can make this stuff. And then this amazing find, this was found quite recently. They date from the 11th to 12th century. They look like they're Byzantine, and they were probably taken by very late Viking activity. They're probably stolen in a raid and taken back to Sweden. And as I said, what's so amazing about this technology is that these are not spherical lenses. These are aspherical. That's quite incredible if you think about it, because it's natural for somebody to try and make a lens that has the arc of a circle for the convexity on a lens, but to go aspherical is mind-boggling. I think it was the early 60s that in Europe, when they first started making aspherical lenses for optical purposes. And here we have somebody who's made a lathe-turned lens, 46 of them, in the 11th or 12th century, which proves that they had the ability. And I showed you these before. These are just paintings showing churchmen using lenses in the early 14th century. In fact, this is almost the exact date the Shroud was first exhibited. So we know that they had lenses. We know they had cameras. We know that they had light-sensitive materials. But what we don't know is if they understood the whole concept of fixing an image, because fixing an image is quite advanced. As I did explain in the early history of photography, proper photography, modern photography, the very first exponents of this technique could not view their works outside the camera, because they were basically taking silver nitrate or silver sulfate. They were allowing it to reduce in the presence of light. They were making images of leaves and strange things like that. And then they would have these brown negative images, and they would have to go into the camera with a candle to look at them. If they took that piece of paper outside, it would go brown, and the image would be lost. Okay, so just repeating, light-sensitive chemicals. Silver nitrate was being made as early as the 8th, 9th century, and we have descriptions by Albertus Magnus, and alchemists knew how to make this stuff. Interestingly enough, silver sulfate also occurs naturally in rivers. There's a river in Spain which has a very low, what would I call it, solution of silver sulfate within it. So it's, however, to make silver sulfate in the laboratory, we normally take silver filings, turn them into dust, and then pour sulfuric acid onto it, which then dissolves it, and you end up with a precipitate at the bottom of the liquid. And what is not a precipitate is 0.47% silver sulfate in solution in the H2O, in the water. The medieval people called sulfuric acid oil of vitriol, which is a very good word for it because it's vitriolic. It makes quite a show when you see the silver dissolving in the acid. The idea of projecting images and even moving images go way back in history. The Chinese are possibly the inventors of this. And we know that the Chinese were the very first people to wear spectacles, but their spectacles were not used for seeing better. They were used to disguise the eyes of judges when they were passing judgment. And they used to use tea crystal. So they were the, if you like, the manufacturers of the world's first sunglasses. And it's quite possible that people like Marco Polo brought back a lot of this information. The Venetians, who were in contact with the Muslim world and the Knight Templar movement, shared a lot of their information, and that include navigation techniques, building techniques, for example. All of this knowledge seemed to be focused on Venice because it was at the crossroads between all these cultures. Okay, in terms of my own work, I've explained that I knew that direct contact is out of the question. And if you want to believe that Jesus made this image, then you would have to believe that Jesus floated around inside the tomb and floated the cloth in front of him straight and flat and beamed himself upon it, which, of course, sounds absolutely ridiculous. But when you look at it objectively, I'm describing photography because that's what happens in photography. So if you wrap a piece of cloth around a three-dimensional object like a face and pull it off, you will have a blurry, disfigured face. The shroud is not disfigured. It is recognizable. And the only way you can do that is by projecting the image. I also mentioned that there's no directionality on the shroud. There's no paintbrush marks. There's no human element there, except for the blood, which we'll come back to. The image appears to be not made by human hand. So in this particular image that I put up here, AB represents the distance between either side of the human eyes. And when you pull off the cloth on the left version, you obviously have a stretched image. And the image on the right shows what happens when you project light, which is bounced off of an image, like an object, onto a flat two-dimensional surface. The first hypothesis, and this goes back to the 1980s when I started, was that they must have taken a human being and hung him up or strapped him onto a board in the sun. The sun is shining on him. And then they would have placed him opposite an aperture, as I showed you earlier, which had a lens within it. And it would have been a crystal lens. And if you open the lens, you take the stopper off of it, then the light from the sun reflects off of the body, traveling in straight lines, creates an inverted image on the piece of cloth, which has to be spread flat, two-dimensional. You cannot get a shroud image unless the shroud is held in a two-dimensional plane. That in itself should be pretty obvious. Okay, if it had been a direct contact, the shroud would be a huge blob. It would be spread sideways, double the width, if you like, of the person. And another interesting thing, if you want to believe that it was made by direct contact, then you've got to explain to me where's the top of the head. There's no top of the head. So when Jesus was making this cloth, this image, he was very, very particular what parts he beamed onto the cloth. He only beamed the front and the back of his body, but not the sides, and he didn't beam the top of his head. But you can clearly see on the shroud that there's no top of the head, which already should be a huge warning to everybody that that's not the way it was made. Okay, my very first experiments went on for about 2 years, from 89 to 91. I wasn't having much joy until I started using crystal. And in the early days, I was using silver nitrate. And on the right, you can see a piece of linen which has been soaked in silver nitrate. It's AgNO3. And I allow it to dry. So the linen is permeated with silver nitrate. Now, silver nitrate is highly reactive, which is one of its problems, and that's why I do not think the shroud was made with silver nitrate. The shroud, as far as I'm concerned, could only have been made with silver sulfate, which I can explain in more detail later. But using silver nitrate to test this theory out, what happens is after 3 days in my first experiment, that's 3 days of 8-hour exposures. And each 8-hour exposure, as I explained, is the movement of the sun from the morning to the afternoon. Possibly to explain this better to people who don't understand, because they've got no practical experience of what's happening here. If you go to the beach and you run around the beach without a sun blocker, you'll notice that by the end of the day, the top of your nose and your cheeks and your forehead will be bright red, burning, but your eyes, the side of your face, and under your chin will be fine. That is because the sun has been beating down upon your body over a long period, and you've been moving around, and the sun has had many opportunities to get to the left and the right side of your face. Your nose, being prominent, has always had sun on it, regardless of what time of day it is. Whereas the side of your face and under your chin and under your eyes, for example, that would be more selective. And that is exactly how these images work. They're based on the amount of time that light has been focused onto the surface of the cloth. That's reflected off of the object on the left, which is your model. And where the light has been reflected off of that object longest, you will have a darker reaction visibly, because it's more layers are being affected. So not just the top layer, but the second and the third layer will also be damaged because of the intensity. And that means that you have, in a sense, a relief. So the image is not like a modern photograph. It's a relief. And as I explained, you then take this piece of cloth and you stick it in ammonia, an aqueous solution of ammonia, and not that stuff that you buy in the shops at 5%. If you really want to speed it up, you can put a 10% ammonia in solution. Technically, you could use urine. Just take a bit of time, because urine contains ammonia in small quantities and also uric acid. After you have dipped it into the ammonia, all the silver ions from the silver nitrate and all the silver atoms, which have been reduced in sunlight, are removed. And now you have an image that's formed from the linen itself. So for those people who do not understand this is exactly like the shroud. There's nothing on it. Like the shroud, there's no dye, there's no paint, there's no stain. There's simply discoloration on the upper fibers of the piece of linen. And that discoloration is caused by damage to the polymers that make up the linen. If you turn that around and photograph it the old-fashioned way, in the darkroom, that's what you see. Exactly like Secondo Pio saw in 1898 when he filmed the Shroud for the very first time. He got a fright of his life. He saw something that he didn't know had existed before. I have to stress, nobody in the Middle Ages knew this would happen. So why would they have made it like this if they didn't know it was going to happen? And that's another clue to its manufacture. Because the people who made this didn't know they were making a photograph. They thought they were making a nice brown image without needing an artist. You don't need any artistic skill whatsoever to make this. It's a very clever and very easy technique, and anybody can do it. You don't need modern technology for this. And I must say at this point, if everybody can imagine for a moment that this had been an image of a tree and not an image of Jesus Christ crucified, they would have worked out the problem immediately. They would have published an article back in 1898 explaining that photography is older than they thought. That is the fact of it, the truth of it. It's only because it's a picture of Jesus that we've had this problem. Okay, the full-length version. After I made my Veronica, I made the full-length version from 1992 onwards. And basically, it's the same thing, except we're using a whole body now. These are photographs of the actual lenses that I use. These are made out of optical quality quartz. There is Jesus hanging from a gibbet in front of the lens, 4 meters from the lens. I have a camera obscura, a crystal lens, a gibbet, a corpse, and sunlight. All of those were available in the Middle Ages. That is a view inside the camera obscura. On the left, you can see the shroud stretched on an easel. And on the right, you can see that spot of light coming from the lens. So you have a shroud, you have an easel, and you have safe lights. Those are the candles. I use those at night so that I don't set off the silver salt. As it turns out, it's pretty safe. You need pretty strong sunlight for the silver salt to start reacting. And that is a picture of what you see inside the camera. So that figure hanging outside, inside the camera, is now upside down. It's inverted because the light rays have crossed over at the point of the lens. And you can see by the light that this is the morning. The one side of the body is illuminated. Remember, the sun is going to pass over this body for an 8-hour period, and it will be illuminated from both the right side, the middle, and the left side in an 8-hour period. So it's actually a moving target in many ways. Okay, so there's your image as you see it inside the camera. When you switch on the lights, that's what you see. Now that is the image after I've removed the silver, but it looks pretty much the same. The silver has gone now, been removed by ammonia, and what we're left with is a chemically induced scorch on the upper fibrils of the shroud. You then roll up that section with the front of the body, and you expose the last 2 meters, which is for the back of the body. You turn the figure of the crucified man around, and you open up the lens for another 3 days of exposure, and that's the figure turned around, and that's what it looks like inside the camera, inverted. And there we see the exposure after, I think, 1 day, and on the right, I think it's after 3 days, to give you an idea of how it builds up. So the Shroud of Port Elizabeth is a negative. When you take a photograph of it, the negative becomes a positive. The Shroud of Turin, as it was when it was at Chambéry, without the train marks, the burn marks, That's how it would have appeared to people in the 14th century. And if you took a photograph of it, that's what you'd see. Okay, now, to make a comparison between what I'm doing and the original Shroud is a bit difficult because I don't have the original body. I don't have the original lens. I'm only trying to find out how they may have made it. I have to keep stressing that. But some things I have noticed after my years of experience playing around with this technology. If you look at the figure of Jesus in the Shroud image, you will see that his head is too small for his body. That's very interesting. So again, you have to leave your religious beliefs at the door here. We're looking here at fact, objective fact. The head is 10% too small. My theory is that the head was a separate exposure. In other words, they did a close-up of the head with a different lens. The head is more detailed than the rest of the body. There's no doubt about it. And then they blocked it off, and they then did a photograph of only the body up to the neck. And because they couldn't judge the distance, they got the proportions a little wrong. And I must also add that the front image and the back image are different lengths. So again, if you want to believe that Jesus made the image, then you must explain why Jesus grew a couple of centimeters in one version and not the other. If you understand the photographic technique, that makes perfect sense, because these guys were not perfectionists. They were simply projecting an image at 4 meters onto a piece of cloth, focusing it, and then opening up the stop during the day. So it's hit and miss, really. There's also something quite feminine about the body of Christ in this image. And I suspect that might also be due to spherical aberration. The lens may have had a distortion, a slight distortion. My image is possibly too good because it's made with a modern lens, highly precision instrument. And also, by playing around with the lighting, depending on which time of year you do this, you get different effects. So I'm assuming, rightly or wrongly, that the Shroud was made in summertime in Europe, possibly in Venice, would be my guess, in the mountains. High UV levels, lots of reflectivity in the snow, and that would also have helped preserve the body if they didn't mummify it. My body is made in South Africa in intense heat, very bright sunlight, and the body was also a white plaster of Paris corpse, which made it very reflective. So I've got far more reflectivity, if you like, on the body. That's why my more recent stuff, which I'll show you just now, is using flesh-colored remains. Models that are flesh-colored, to try and subdue the reflectivity. And that gives you an image that's closer to what you see in the Shroud. But again, I don't have the original body or bodies. I do not have the original lens. I am simply trying to show how it's possible to do this using medieval technology. Okay, there's the Shroud of Port Elizabeth full-length version. These are some of the models that I use when I'm experimenting, and some of the lenses that I play around with. This was a very interesting image that I made in Port Elizabeth in 2002 using silver sulfate. This is when I got onto the silver sulfate. And what is very interesting, I must repeat, is that silver sulfate in solution does not need any measuring devices. You can simply throw silver sulfate into water, and whatever doesn't form a precipitate at the bottom of the container, you know that it's 0.47% silver sulfate in water. It's that simple. You simply soak it the night before, you let it dry. And this particular one I made in one day. This is only an 8-hour exposure. And if you photograph it in the good old-fashioned way, you get that. Highly three-dimensional image. This is just a picture I took in 2014. The CNN science group came over to my university to see what I was up to, and we took some footage for them. And this is after one day of exposure, and you can see very clearly the face of Jesus upside down in the middle of that piece of cloth. And this is what it looks like after 3 days. Unfortunately, the cloth in this particular example had a lot of starch that wasn't washed out, and the starch has ensured that those places where there's starch, no image has been recorded. That's because there's no silver. Let's put it another way. The silver has responded to the sun, but the electrons have not damaged the cloth because there's starch basically blocking it. And when you take a photograph of it, you can see it more clearly. Other features which give you a hint as to the accuracy of this particular technique explaining image formation on the Shroud of Turin is that the shroud was made with linen with a very small trace of cotton, and it was stretched onto a loom and woven. And when you make a piece of cloth on a loom, you first of all use the woof threads. They are the long ones that run through the entire length of the piece of material, and those are starched for strength. And then the weft weave is moved from side to side over the woof. And the shroud shows clearly these two lines running through the image on either side of the face and also through the body. Not so visible, but it's there. And the reason why that has happened is because the starch in the woof has stopped the image from forming on the shroud, exactly like mine on the left. And the other reason is that because the sides of the face are in shadow, the silver salt doesn't react so violently, which means that you don't get such a good image in those areas. You'll also notice there's a shadow under the chin, shadows under the eyes, shadows under the nose, which shows a slight top-lit quality. Nobody has ever explained that. This technique explains it, because that figure was hanging up in the sun. And obviously it got sunlight on its face slightly higher than the head, which all makes perfect sense. Shall I leave it there, or do you want me to carry on talking about the blood?
Yeah, we'll talk about the blood. I just want to take this question real quick. This is from my co-host, Leron. Leron, thank you for your super chat. How did the hoist not show up on the image?
Well, the hoist doesn't show up on my image either. It's quite easy. There are many ways to hang a body in the sunlight. They may have put a metal spike through his skull, for all I know, and hung him up on a piece of rope. We don't know. They may have pinned him onto a black board with little nails. For example, that whole debate about why he doesn't have any thumbs. One possibility is that they tied the thumbs together so that he wouldn't move when he was hanging in the sunlight. Another possibility is that there may have been some image on the back view that they tried to disguise, and that's why they put that. You can see it on the screen now, this image now, on the right-hand side, the image of the blood trickled across the small of the back. I've always wondered why would they do that, and possibly the people who made the shroud simply threw it along the width of the cloth to hide something, maybe. When you are dealing also with these kind of images, the contrast between the body and the background is quite intense. I mean, I place my figures in front of a dark background, so that only the figure is illuminated in the sun, and that helps. I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
So you're going to continue with the blood, or are we done with that as well?
Yes, well, the blood is clearly painted on with a paintbrush. It really worries me that people can't see that. If you know a medical guy, I've actually got his book here somewhere. Let's see if I can find it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Back in the 50s or 60s, he wrote a full medical report explaining how the man in the shroud had died and proving that he died of crucifixion, and gave this long report using the blood as evidence. And it's really quite fantastical that somebody would do that as a doctor, a medical doctor. I find that really frightening. First of all, let's just have a little bit of imagination now. Let's imagine for a moment that a real crucified person has been hanging on a cross for 6 hours, bleeding profusely. It's been whipped all over, by the way, as well. It's covered in blood. And they take the corpse down from the cross. So he's being manhandled. Okay. You can imagine the mess. I mean, just think of the purging. All right. Dead people purge from orifices. All sorts of muck and blood is going to start coming out. They take this body and they take it to the tomb, and they neatly place it, like, as I say, in the shroud, like it was a sandwich. And the only blood that we have on the cloth is neatly presented in all the right places, as though it's a painting. I mean, surely you can see that that is impossible. I mean, it's just totally ridiculous to even believe that. For a start, if you've been hanging around for 6 hours and maybe 3 hours you're alive and 3 hours you're dead, your heart stopped. The blood is now coagulating. A lot of that blood is not actually going to come off the body. It's going to be dried on the body. So you're not going to have neat blood flows recorded on every arm and coming out the feet and coming out the side, and all the crown of thorn marks neatly arranged. And if anybody wants to believe that that is possible, they really need to think about it very carefully. Maybe take an object like a dead pig and cut it up and put it onto a piece of cloth and just see what mess you will have. So for a start, it's impossible. We have to accept that. Secondly, if you look at the supposed spear mark in the side of Christ's chest, where the pilum, the Roman pilum, was supposed to have been stabbed into his body, don't you find it rather interesting that the blood came out in little rivulets, all exactly 1/2 inch wide? Doesn't that in any way alert you to there being a problem here? And then you look at the wound in the wrist, and you see that the blood is the same width as the blood that came out the wound in the side. And when the blood flows down the arm, it's the same width. The blood's not allowed to be thinner or thicker than that. I call it the 1/2 inch, all right? The same with the foot. You have the zigzag coming out of the foot. So the blood does funny things. It zigzags, it jumps, and reattaches itself to the body. The blood that comes out the nail in the wrist stops flowing just above the wrist and then restarts again on the forearm. So it's sort of magic blood. It sort of jumps where it wants to be. And the same for the blood along the back, the so-called chain marks. That is just a series of zigzags with the same thickness all the way. So even where the blood spilled completely naturalistically from the dead body as they were taking it down, it didn't splash on the cloth. It made perfect lines. So, and what's even more amazing, I did this. I put circles around the entry wounds for the spear and the nails, and they're exactly the same size, and they're round. So somebody took a paintbrush and made a blob where they thought the wound should be, and then artistically embroidered the blob with these very artistic lines. They look almost like a signature. It's another way of putting it. It's a flamboyant signature that somebody used to paint this. But it is blood. Pretty easy to forge, I would say. Blood is pretty freely available, and whether it's human or pig blood or chicken blood, as I said, it doesn't really matter. It's hemoglobin. The Sturp committee looked at this very, very carefully, and I agree with their report. This is denatured methemoglobin. It's very old blood, and blood contains iron. And what we have here is the iron aspect of the blood. And the reason why it is so red is because somebody added red ochre to it. Water Macron picked that up in his own work. He said that he found red ochre on the cloth. And I agree with him. That's the only thing that makes sense. If you see old blood, it doesn't stay red like this. So it's been mixed with something to keep the color. And iron oxide is the most obvious thing that comes to mind. And again, these things were all available in the Middle Ages. There's nothing magical about this. The point of the shroud is to present the image of the crucified Christ for worship purposes, veneration purposes. So it is a mixture of this photographic technique, which gave them the negative body very quickly to represent the sweat of the Savior, and then they simply painted the blood on afterwards to represent the blood of Christ. Does that make sense? I hope so. Yeah.
Yes, it does. Yeah, so my co-host Liron is about to join us. He wants to ask you a few questions.
Sure.
All right, Liron, you're on.
Hello, Mr. Allen. Nice
Hi.
Liron, your microphone volume is very low.
Checking
Yeah,
one,
Liron,
two. 1, 2.
Very soft.
Checking 1, 2.
That's
check
better,
1, 2.
much better. I hear you
Okay.
now.
First of all, Dr. Allen, I really want to thank you for this amazing presentation. This has been a wonder inside of a wonder. Never in my wildest dreams I would imagine that the Shroud of Turin was the first known photograph in the world.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, I think there were other ones before, but they haven't survived. Or the Veronica in the Vatican or in St. Peter's could very easily be an early version of this from the 7th century. This technology could go back further than the 13th. I mean, I believe it's possible they could have made this by the 9th century with the technology that we see here.
I have some questions about the blood. Let's say they provided ochre in powder form. Now, my understanding is at that time, when they used paints, they used just very fine powders with tempera, which is basically egg.
Absolutely.
I don't think they had oil paints at this point.
Well, yeah. I speak under correction, but I think the first oil was sort of 15th century, early 15th century. But certainly most artists were using egg tempera up until the 14th century and beyond.
Can you tell people what tempera is, just for the people that don't know?
Okay, it's white of egg mixed with an oxide.
With what?
And you can put a bit of yolk in as well. And it makes a very strong
It's
binder.
essentially like acrylics, like modern acrylics, because you have you have medium pigment in the binder, except acrylics are much better. I mean, come on. So
it lasts a long time too. I mean, egg is incredibly difficult to remove once it's set.
oh yes, so is acrylics, by the way. I paint with a lot of acrylics.
I don't think they used tempera on the Shroud. I think they just used water, quite frankly.
So they used like primitive watercolors with ochre?
They took some blood, they probably watered it down, threw in some red ochre, and the artist did his thing. Maybe they did a few practice swipes. By the way, what I haven't mentioned, there's also something like 180 whip marks on this thing.
What?
We haven't even spoken about the whip marks. There are these little tripartite, it looks like somebody has, people claim it was the marks of the flagellum, the Roman flagellum, with 3 lead balls on a piece of leather, and the cat of 9 tails was whipped, and it leaves these little marks. But if you look at these little marks on the shroud, they're all identical, which means that if we're to believe that this is Christ being whipped at the column, the executioner was very, very precise on how he laid that that whip. And interestingly enough, the doctor that I spoke about mentions in his book that this guy deliberately avoided the heart region to keep him alive, which is also very funny. The reason why that heart region has been left alone is because they wanted to emphasize the wound in the side. So you don't want to mess with so I think they'd used a potato, all right? They made a potato print.
There were no potatoes at that time.
They dipped it in the blood and they just went stamp, 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 stamp all over the thing to make the...
I think they would have used the sponge. I've used sponges to dry brush off, and sponges are very good for that type of stuff, in my opinion. Yeah. Also, just a point on the brushwork, what type of brush do you think they used at that point? Because my understanding is that brushes at the time were just bad compared to what we have.
I don't know. What I would like to mention at this point very quickly is that I've seen programs where people have actually criticized this theory because they say the blood has no image underneath it. Okay, you've heard that.
Okay, that's okay.
And during the STURP committee reports, they said that there is a halo effect around the blood, which was picked up by the X-ray fluorescence. And they're quite right. There is. There's like a glow. If you look at the wound of the side, you can see there's like a pale shadow running around the blood. Can you see that?
Can you show it again?
If you look at the blood on the side, it looks like it's inside a pale background. It's paler.
Yeah.
It's rounded. And so they say, you're wrong about this because if there's no image under the cloth, under the blood, it means the blood was put on first and then the image, which means you're wrong. All right? That's the argument. Now, I was very privileged. Back in the 80s, I worked at a University of Technology, and although I was in the fine arts, I had friends in chemistry. And a man who I have a lot of respect for, I don't even know if he's still alive, his name was Rod Woolgar. He was a hematologist. And I mentioned this problem to him, and he said to me, oh, it's obvious. He says, blood has got a bleaching quality to it. He says, blood is a natural bleaching agent. I mean, which is interesting from a Jewish perspective, because, blood was used almost as a disinfectant, a sacred disinfectant to remove illnesses and diseases, and used to sprinkle on the altar to purify it. Rather interesting that blood has natural disinfectant qualities as well. So I did a test myself. I took one of my first heads, the one I showed you from 1992, and I put 1 drop of blood on it. And within a week, there was a pale area around the blood, which proves that's what's happening. I mean, it removes the image. The image is neutralized for some reason by that. So what it actually proves is the opposite. It proves the blood was put on afterwards, which is what I've always been saying. So So there's no doubt about it.
Also, once that you mention it, yes, it's plainly obvious that the blood was made with a brush. You can even see, when I have here my favorite brush. It's a sable.
Yeah.
You know, when you use a brush, the paint always coalesces at the end of the stroke. It's literally there. Like,
you see, the thing is, I'm an artist, so this was obvious to me. I mean, I paint and I sculpt, and I see this and I go, "What the hell are we talking about here?" It's obvious. It's, and I'm not knocking the Shroud. I must just tell you, the Shroud may be a fake, but it is probably the most incredible piece of technology produced for its time. As far as I'm concerned, it's the equivalent of the space shuttle for the period it was made. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's brilliant on every level. It's brilliant in terms of the society that made it, the religious beliefs of the time, and the symbolism behind it. As an artwork, it's a masterpiece. It really is. And it's also using the best technology of the period. And this thing should be in a museum, not a church. It should be in a photographic museum and looked after by scientists. Where it will be better respected.
I think I definitely agree with you, but I think it's kind of sad that the best minds of the time were devoting their efforts in order to basically fool people in a religious manner instead of making advances.
There's one right now, by the way. Do you know in Naples? Have you heard of Saint Januarius?
Yes, the blood guy, the blood saint.
Now that's the same period as the Shroud. Okay, exactly the same period. And that's very clever. That uses a thixotropic chemical. And what happens is by either heat from the candles or by a knocking or jarring of the so-called dry blood, it suddenly becomes liquid. And the fact that it's held up between candles on the altar before the miracle happens seems to suggest that that's part of the technique. And you can't tell me that the priests who handle that thing don't know this. Okay? They'll tell you there's a miracle.
Originally, they probably didn't know it, but after a while, they sort of gone like, okay, now I know what it was.
It is pure fraud. I've seen people weeping and crying when that thing is in the audience. The people, they break down when they see that. Yeah, the Shroud is both a relic and an icon. It is a mixture of East and West. It's a blend of Latin Catholicism and Orthodox Greek. It is a brilliant piece of work, and there's no doubt that there were precursors to it. We have descriptions of very similar things. In 1204, when the Franks destroyed Constantinople, there is a record of a Jesus on a cloth rising out of a pretend tomb in the church to represent the resurrection of Christ on Good Friday. So the idea is old. It's not as new as 1350.
So we have a super chat question from iFishNetHigh. Thank you for your super chat. If it only takes 8 hours to make an image, let's live stream the process and end the debate of its authenticity.
Man, that would be like watching paint dry.
I don't think the person realized that there's a doctoral thesis on this, which I was granted in '94 for this work. And there are something like 20 articles out there that explain this process in great detail. And there are 3 books. It's all been. In fact, I had a guy film a lot of the stuff back in the 90s. It's very easy to duplicate, and you don't need me to do it. You can do it yourself. It's really easy. You just get some silver sulfate, pop it in a box with a lens, and see the results.
Isn't silver sulfate incredibly toxic?
No. I wouldn't want to eat it, but.
So
Silver nitrate is very reactive, which is what I was using, and it caused me a lot of problems in the early days because sometimes moisture would get into the camera, and I'd come in the morning and the whole image would be covered in blotches. Very, very, very upsetting. And we're talking many months of work here, up all night painting the cloth and dipping it and then drying it with fans and then making sure it was hung up properly inside the camera and then making sure it was focused. And then in the morning, making sure that at 7 o'clock on the dot, the lens is opened, and then making sure that there's no clouds. If there's clouds, then suddenly the whole experiment's ruined and you've got to start it from scratch again. I also had cows on my property, so I had to put electric fences up to keep them away from Jesus. I had a police helicopter hovering over my farm, wondering why I had a dead body hanging on a gibbet one day.
It's for science.
And I'll tell you something else. There's so many armchair scientists out there, but this is not armchair science. This is practical stuff. I learned everything literally on the job. I learned stuff as I went along, and that's why now I'm actually quite tired of this topic, to be quite frank with you. And there's been absolutely no feedback from the scientific community. It's ridiculous. It's like they don't want to be a solution. In fact, it actually happened to me in about 95 or 6. One of the reporters in Port Elizabeth came to visit me in my office at the university. In fact, I'd just become the dean of the faculty. And he came into my office and he said, you remember that theory you had on the Shroud? I said, yeah. He said, you got any more?
What?
So then you realize this is all about sensationalism. They're not interested in truth. They don't want an answer. They just want more stuff,
Well, so there's. I do have another question. When the figure was hanging upside down, how did his hair not, fall down? Because the figure had long hair, and the hair
it's not hanging down. It's upright. The image is upside down.
Oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. They just flipped the cloth. Yeah, that makes sense.
Remember the candle? The candle is upright, but the candle in the camera is upside down.
Right. That makes sense.
It's an inverted image. As I say, Allah Thumb used this very technique to prove that light traveled in straight lines. And that was centuries before Newton. Yeah.
That's sensible. I think I had another question. I can't remember. Do you think they used a corpse, or do you think they just used the sculpture?
I don't know. If I had to do this now, if I was sent back in time to do this now, I would probably need 2 or 3 bodies.
Okay. And the same size, which might be difficult to find.
It doesn't really matter because it's focused. You can play with the distance.
Okay.
You can move, okay. We used to think that this face of Christ looked a bit. They used to use the word noble Arab, and I remember I gave a talk on this in 1994, and I got the woke group were there, and they were very angry with me for using the word noble Arab. And they said that's racist, and I said, well, I'm not trying to be racist. I'm just saying it's a person with a very big nose, with a very beautiful face, and it looks Arabic, But then again, it could have been a European, a Caucasian from Europe. If it's not a Caucasian from the Middle East. Yeah.
Italians also have big noses, and you said this happened in Naples, so
yeah. Doesn't matter. The point is, he was a very good-looking chap. Whoever they used. Yeah, I don't know if he. Oh, and of course, that's the other thing that makes me laugh. Leonardo did this, because Leonardo had a big nose and a beard. Yeah, that's now been chucked at me as well. I just don't even know what to say. But the point is, we have here a photograph of probably the world's first murder victim.
Oh no, it could have died a natural cause, and the person would be like, "Hey, you see that? I mean,
maybe it was baiting Jew Day. Maybe it was Shrove Tuesday, and they were bashing Jews around. Okay, that could have happened. Jews didn't have a very good time at this time.
Yeah.
You know what? Shrove Tuesday, you were allowed to strike Jews on that day.
Really?
Yes. And our ancestors, when they went on the crusade, they not only killed Muslims, they killed Jews because they were wearing pointy shoes. All right, they saw them as being of the devil and evil. So to destroy or to kill a Jew at this time would not have been a problem.
No,
okay?
that's.
There are lots of corpses. We're also talking about the plague period. If this was 1350, the plague starts around 1350s about a third of Europeans died during that time. Bodies were plentiful. Okay, so yeah, I probably would just use bodies. But if I wanted to keep it the same person, I would have to mummify. I think I'd have to preserve the body in some way, unless they did it which I suspect they did it in the Alps. The Venetian Alps would be my first choice. It's nice and high, lots of UV, lots of light. And you've got lots of snow to reflect the light. It would have made it much easier.
Clouds or cloudy days are kind of rare over
What
there.
you need is UV.
Right, yeah.
There's another thing I haven't mentioned this. The nanometers of light that affect the silver is 265 nanometer. Glass tends to hide that. And water, moisture, and clouds block UV. Optical crystal allows UV through. So it's also interesting that happens. And here's another thing, if you're into symbolism, these people that did this were not scientists, but if they were heavy into hylomorphism and they'd been reading Aristotle, Aristotle comes to the fore here, because from a Christian perspective, Christ is the intercessor. He's a priest. And he's a priestly person, an intercessor between man and God. He comes into the world through the Virgin Mary. The Virgin Mary is the only woman in history who was not blighted with original sin. Okay? For some reason, God couldn't do it for the rest of us, but Mary was let off the hook.
I thought Anna was also exempt.
No, she was referred to as speculum sine maculum, which means mirror without spot. And she was represented by mirrors, lenses, crystal, pearls. And they used to believe that crystal was water that had become ice and become fossilized. They actually believed that. And when they made icons of the Virgin Mary, they used to hang round, polished, optical quality quartz globes where her breasts were, all right, because she gives off milk to the infant Christ. She's the mother of God. She's mothering God. She's bringing God into the world as incarnate God. And she's portrayed the image that we often see Christ in a mandala shape, which is the vesica pisces, which is shaped like an almond. It looks like a fish. You probably see the early Christians used to draw two lines and make a fish shape. That is the interface between the macrocosm and the microcosm. So the interface between heaven, if you like, and God, and the earth, where the humans live, is an overlap where the intercessor lives. That's where Christ lives. This is a Gnostic idea. So if you accept Christ into your life, you are then allowed to exist in the macrocosm, or the pleroma. Can I use that word? So we live in the sphere of darkness, and God lives in the sphere of light. And where they cross over, you have a vesica pisces shape, a fish shape. It looks like a lens.
Yeah, it's like
the lens is actually used in the camera obscura to transfer the God light, the Father light, through the lens and incarnate as the image of God on this piece of cloth, which is made of silver. Silver is the symbol of the Virgin Mary. And the linen is a symbol of priesthood. So already, you could actually make the shroud using religious symbolism without knowing the science.
Right, and these weren't scientists, these were alchemists who thought about everything in this.
The lens is the Virgin Mary. You see that? The lens is the Virgin Mary. God, the Father, the sunlight goes through the lens, impregnates her, and makes an image of himself inside the camera, which is the earth. The earth is the darkness, the camera, and outside is the macrocosm. So you have this wonderful imagery, which is very in keeping with medieval hylomorphism. So if you're interested in that, it's fascinating stuff.
I'm gonna take a couple more super chats. Pine Nut, thank you for your super chat. iFishNet High, thank you for your super chat. Does Nicholas address the human and plant DNA found?
Okay. That's a tall story that there's no plant or human DNA. But what I can tell you is that when this before the Stirp Committee. Actually, no, I'm lying. After the Stirp Committee, Ian Wilson wrote a lot of books about the Shroud, and he got friendly with Max Frey. Max Frey was, I think, a Swiss criminologist. And Max, I don't know if he was involved directly with Shroud of Turin research project Stirp, but his photograph appears. Barry Schwartz definitely photographed him taking samples of pollen off of the Shroud. Okay. He was allowed to put sellotape onto the cloth and pull off bits and pieces of dust and stuff that stuck onto the fibers. And then in his laboratory, he identified various pollens. Okay. The next thing they did was they took a trip to modern Judea. Okay.
As well, that's where I'm
yeah,
from.
Israel, and they walk around Jerusalem looking for these specific plants. And when they find them, they go, this proves that the Shroud was in Jerusalem.
Yeah, that doesn't work because I happen to know this because
everybody bought into this complete nonsense. This is pseudoscience.
That doesn't work. I can tell you why that doesn't work specifically. There's just a lot of plant types from Europe and Africa and Asia and Israel because it's so close. It's not.
Well, there are many problems to this. The first problem is that when Max Frey was doing his pollen research, he didn't realize that you have to strip the pollen of its very biomorphic exterior. It's got like a sticky, gluey resin around the object. And it's not possible to make an accurate identification through a microscope unless you strip away this biological material. He didn't do that. And in addition, he has sellotape stick all over it. So he's dealing with a very inaccurate.
Because the sellotape glue, you're just going to pick up on the glue.
Yeah, it's just a lot of rubbish. Secondly, what you then do, let's assume that he did it correctly and he knows for a fact what pollen is on the Shroud. You know that pollen travels around the stratosphere, right?
Yep.
It can come from anywhere. They also found legs of insects. They found fibers from ladies' pantyhose on the Shroud. So now, does that mean the Shroud was made in a pantyhose factory? By the same logic, right? Maybe scientists here. Let's get real, okay? Made by Berkshire, stocking factory, because they found evidence of actual ladies' pantyhose fibers on the Shroud. Right. There was also dust from the Fiat factory in Turin. All right. Obviously, it's been taken out every 100 years and displayed. It's got dust all over it. Okay, not to mention
just detritus. It could come from anywhere. Yeah.
But let's be kind to these people and say that all the pollen on there didn't come out of the stratosphere. It actually came from where it was in France when it moved from Legh to Chambéry to Turin, and wherever else it may have been before. Let's be kind to them. Then what you do is you look for plants of that nature everywhere in the world, not just in Jerusalem. Okay. So it's a manufactured answer. You basically have the conclusion before you start. That's not science.
No.
And if a student of mine did that for their doctoral thesis, it would be chucked out and laughed at. I mean, it's just a joke. But yet, here we live, and people take this stuff seriously and write books on it.
Did you ever look into?
It's actually very disappointing.
Did you ever look into the type of linen that their Shroud was made out of, or it's not?
Yes, I know a lot about the linen. It was obviously a very prestigious piece of linen. It cost a lot of money at that time. It has traces of cotton, and that cotton comes from Arabia. But that doesn't mean the Shroud comes from the Middle East, because that stuff was imported.
Right, cotton's everywhere.
Europe, I mean, Liège, for example, I mean, these people were making amazing stuff with imported fabrics, and that doesn't prove anything.
Well, to be precise, I think cotton comes from India and it's imported through Arabian Peninsula.
Yeah,
I think
the quartz that they used for the lens probably came from India. That makes sense. As I say, Venice. My guess is Venice is the key to this, because Venice is the crossroads between the Islamic world and the Christian world and the Knights Templar movement and we know this was the time the Knights Templars actually traveled to North America. I mean, we have evidence of that.
Wait, what?
I mean, these guys knew how to navigate, and they got that information, obviously speaking to very learned people who were coalescing, if you like, in Venice. I mean, Marco Polo, for example, before this time, bringing information in from the Chinese East, bringing the very first porcelains in. People didn't know what porcelain was. They thought it was magic. They even made chalices in the church out of solid gold where the rice bowl was held on the top as a gem. All right?
Anything Chinese is magic to these people.
The Chinese are, well, I mean, let's be honest. Every culture on this planet has had a Mesolithic and a Neolithic period at a different time. And the ancient Near East had one of the earliest. We talk about the Fertile Crescent, the advances in Sumeria, Mesopotamia, and ancient Egypt. Very, very ancient. The Chinese predate that by a millennium. I mean, they were melting bronze in the 7th millennium BCE. I mean, these people are hell of an advanced culture.
No, the Chinese are the most crafty people in
They are, as far as I'm concerned, they're the superior race on this planet. They are.
Well, now they make microchips in Taiwan, so...
Hitler got it wrong. He shouldn't have tried to make the Aryan race the master race. That's a little joke.
Jeez. Nick, this is the internet. People don't know you're joking. It's a joke.
Okay. Again,
we have another super chat from Pine Nut. Is this the same under a microscope as a shroud?
The people got to understand something, that I am trying to ratiocinate a technique that's plausible. I don't have the same piece of linen that was used to make the shroud. I don't have the same body, etc., etc. But what I can tell you is that on my esters, and I use the word ester because that's a technical term for things like linen, cotton, and paper, which we use for this technique. You can make a shroud with paper. You can make it with linen, cotton, as long as it's organic. Okay? You can probably make it on your skin. I'm quite sure you can make a shroud on your skin. All right. But if you're looking at fibers under a microscope, my fibers won't look exactly the same as the fibers on the shroud. But what I can tell you is that they are damaged on one side. And if you break a fiber in half, it's clear inside. And those are the same features that you had on the shroud imagery.
Well, wait, was this the same type of linen they would use for painting on a canvas, or not really?
Yeah, possibly, but different weaves. And the shroud's a very strange 3-in-1 herringbone twill. It's a very strange... It's almost a decorative weave. That's why it's a very special. I mean, if you're doing a canvas for painting, you're not going to go to all that trouble. You're going to just do a simple one-on-one weft, crossover. Yeah. I use this example, if I can just quickly.
Sure.
I just want to. I was trying to talk about this. What am I doing here? Okay, I use this image. I was trying to explain this last week when I was talking to Yakov. If you were to imagine that we'd never ever seen a painting before, and I'm trying to find an analogy here for what's happening here. Imagine painting had never been invented. Imagine we lived in a world where nobody had actually painted anything. All right, we'd never thought of it. And out of the Middle Ages, out of the Renaissance, comes this masterpiece, the Mona Lisa, and we hang it, in the cathedral because we think it's a miracle, and everybody adores it and worships it and says they cannot understand how it was made. All right,
like porcelain.
Yeah, And then this idiot, Nick Allen, comes along and paints the Laughing Cavalier, okay, and says, perhaps this is something similar to what they used, okay? And instead of them all jumping up and saying, gee, let's look at this in more detail, they go, no, it can't be, because, you know, the Laughing Cavalier has a moustache. That's the kind of level of argument that I get from people. They don't look at what's going on underneath. They keep looking at surface things. So they'll say, it can't be. Where are the other shrouds from the Middle Ages? If you're correct, and I say, well, there aren't any. You know, what's that going to do with the price of eggs? But that's a big issue for them, because there must be another one. Otherwise, it can't be right. This technique can't be right unless there's another one. And I'm saying we're lucky to have this one. It was nearly burnt down in 1352. I mean, can you imagine if the Shroud had been burned in 1352? We wouldn't even know about this. Because in the Middle Ages, there were very clever people doing very clever things, but they didn't have mass production. Okay? And we have this habit. We're so arrogant. We look at the past and think that people were stupid in the past. You know? They weren't that stupid. I mean, they made pyramids to start with. I mean, that's pretty impressive. I'll take one example from history. Herod. Okay, Herod the Great, that Edomian wannabe who was the puppet king of Judea for a while. He used Roman technology to build palaces at Masada, and he built at least 3 temples, one dedicated to Gaius Julius Caesar, and he also built the harbor at Caesarea.
Still around.
It still exists. It still
I've
works.
been there. I've been there. It's very nice.
You got to ask yourself something. What do we do with all our technology when we build a harbor? We spend literally billions building these massive ships with scrapers, and they suck up all the sand, and they sail a few kilometers out, and they dump the sand. And next year, all that sand is back in the harbor. All right. Herod's engineers used pylons, which they put into the sea, to use the natural forces to suck the sand out of the harbor continually. And it still works to this day. And they didn't have our technology, but they had more brains, obviously. So, I mean, you can't tell me that the people were stupid and they got more clever. In fact, I think technology spoils people. People today really don't have stopped thinking. They don't even know how to memorize anymore. They use Google now if they want to find out something. We have students now who don't even write essays. They use AI. And lazy lecturers who don't even bother to check it. And I jokingly said the other day at the university, I said, you know, the irony is now that if the essay is perfectly spelled, we know it was forged. You know, we used to demand perfect spelling, and now it's a giveaway that the students cheated. I mean, that's the world we live in now. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what to add to this.
No, that was superlative. I mean, this is one of the. I've been around here and I've been watching YouTube videos. This is at least your presentation, at least one of my top 5 favorite videos ever, and I've ever seen. I mean,
I would just like. I would like the opportunity for somebody. It doesn't have to be me, to be given permission to do X-ray fluorescent examination of the cloth in Turin using the correct excitation electrodes to check specifically for silver. And if I'm right, they will find parts per billion in the cloth. It has to be there.
Well, but to be fair,
yeah.
There's a small issue with that. Remember when you said that it was housed in a silver box and the torch was on fire? So, you know, if you say silver, they could just say, oh, well, of course there's silver there because it was in a silver box that got burned down. So
yes, that is a problem. That is indeed a very good problem. But, you know, every time I talk about this, I get told, they tested for silver, didn't find any. Now, that's not true. If you read the reports, they went in looking for forgery, and they went in looking for paint and dye and pigment. And they only had the equipment to test up to the level of iron. And I think they found strontium, cadmium, and iron. Don't quote me on that. But they never looked specifically for things like gold. By the way, you could use gold to do this.
Yeah, gold is pretty red.
Be very expensive, but you could do it. But silver's more obvious. And as I keep saying, I mean, they could have used mirrors to do this too. But why try to get somebody to polish a perfect mirror of that size when you can just use a little lens? I mean, I'm not looking for problems here, you know. I mean, I think we take the path of least resistance. So, it needs more research, and it needs research now in the correct context. The Sturp committee did a good job, but they went in blind. They went in not thinking what they were going to find. They didn't do their homework. And they wasted those 5 or 6 days looking for something that they should have known wasn't there to start with.
Well, you know, if I was a cynic, I would say that they were selected because the people acquiring them knew they didn't do their homework, so they knew what they would not find.
I don't want to go that far, but certainly a number of them had strong faith and were part of the church, which is a problem. Nowadays, when you read up on it, they're very quick to say this is not true, and a lot of people there from different faiths. The point is, the leaders of the committee were all religious except for Walter McCrone, and Walter McCrone was the only one to come forward with the red oxide, the iron oxide story, which completely fits in with what I'm saying. I mean, the others didn't want to say it. They said it's not so.
Wait, just a question. They found cadmium. Now, if you paint today, you know that cadmium is used for everything. There's cadmium yellow, cadmium red, cadmium orange. It's not very good. Like, they found cadmium and they didn't say, oh, this might be paint, because we know cadmium is a very common source of red paint. No?
Yeah, well, another thing, because you see, the thing is, I'm not looking at this in isolation. I have a bit of a bird's eye view of the world in the Middle Ages. I'm a generalist. I'm not a specialist. And this is also the time that stained glass was taking off, which I haven't even mentioned. And what was the key to stained glass? Silver. Silver salt. Okay. Yeah. So it's the same time. So what happens? The very first yellow glass they made, I think in the 1200s, was silver salt. And then they started inventing other colors. They brought in copper for green and irons for the browns, and gold was used for red. Gold, if you put a drop of gold into molten glass, you get this beautiful pink, rosy color.
A magenta?
No, it's not magenta. It's more like rose.
Okay.
And if you look at Sainte-Chapelle, which was built by Saint Louis to house the crown of thorns, that whole building is an expression. It's a technological marvel of that period, and it was there because of silver, you know. So these people knew about these chemicals. It's not like this was something new to them. It's not like you know. And I've been accused of trying to give technology to these people they didn't have. I was very careful not to even talk about this for about 5 years until I had made sure of all my facts. And I have gone everywhere to look for stuff and try to make sure that I'm not jumping to any conclusions. The only thing I can't prove is the fixing technique. Let's put it another way. I understand they could have discovered that accidentally, because in the linen trade they used urine at that time.
Right.
The first person on this planet to actually point out that silver salt was going brown because of light was a guy called Boyle. He was a chemist. I don't quote. I think he lived in the 1600s. I don't quote me on that, but that's quite a lot of years after the Shroud. So you have to imagine that somebody had the ability to get to that realization that we're dealing with light that's causing this.
Well, they didn't need to know why it happened. They just needed to know that it did happen and find ways to, okay, let's apply this, see what happens, you know.
You don't need the science. You just need to have the experience. And then, of course, who did this? Was it a small group of people? My favorite theory, and this is just speculation, there's no proof of what I'm saying, but if Geoffroy de Charnay was the nephew of the last preceptor of Normandy, who was burnt at the stake on Ile de Juif, the island of the Jews, in the middle of Paris in 1314. Is it not possible that he, the uncle, had the shroud? And it was being made and used to restore the order, because they knew they needed a rallying point to give the order its validity again, because they've been accused of blasphemy, spitting on the cross, and all sorts of things, and worshipping Baphomet, which was because they couldn't pronounce Muhammad. And
That's true.
so you have this interesting situation where perhaps, and I'm speculating, the Knights Templar, the young ones, all got away from Philip the Fair's atrocities. But the older ones stayed to face the music because they knew they were innocent. And most of them ended up dying or losing their lands or being severely punished. And the order eventually fell into disarray. Jean Le Bon II, in the 1350s, he now restores the Templar ideal with the Knights of the Star, which is based on the worship of the Virgin Mary. It only lasted a year, this order, but the point is he tried. And Geoffroy de Charnay Geoffroy I Charnay, the nephew, he was one of the main members of this group. So that's also interesting, isn't it? That the uncle dies and the nephew is part of the revival, and the shroud just happens to be in his hands. Interesting, yeah. And the Knights Templar uniform, the symbol is a white cloth with a red cross on it, which symbolizes the body and blood of Christ. And they lived like Jesus. They didn't wash for a year. They grew their beards long. Yeah?
They didn't wash.
No, not for a year. No.
And they went on campaign.
Yeah, well, they were all nobles, French nobles, and they went to protect the pilgrims on the route to the Holy Land.
Did nobody think it's a bad idea that soldiers on campaign would not wash for a year and it might lead to hygiene issues? I mean, why do I even ask these things?
Western European Caucasians didn't do very well on the Crusades. The evidence seems to be that the longest anybody survives was maybe 25, 30 years. They didn't survive in the Middle East. It was very bad.
The heat got to them, and the sun, there was no sunscreen.
They died like flies. The church pumped a lot of money into it. There was also a land grab going on because there was land shortage. So from 1080 to 1292, you basically have the church encouraging people to run off to the Holy Land to claim lands. You have the county of Edessa and the county of Jerusalem, and you have people calling themselves Count and King of Jerusalem and all sorts of city titles. They basically were trying to turn it into Europe, all right? And it didn't work. And anybody been there longer than 20 years was now adapting to the culture because they were trying to survive. And then the next crusade would kill them because they didn't look like a European. So you have this aspect as well.
This is one of the worst planned military operations I've ever heard of.
We can thank the Crusades for our present problem with the Islamic world. The atrocities that the Europeans did in the Middle East, that's 700 years ago, but that actually really caused problems. We're still reaping those problems now today.
You know, I live it. Sorry, never mind.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take this last super chat question and then we'll close. I thank you for your super chat. Same response with the travertine aragonite found.
I'm not immediately aware of what that's about. You'll have to explain.
Aragonite is silver.
Yeah, I'm thinking this person thinks that was found on the shroud.
It's a type of limestone.
Let me be clear. The shroud, before they vacuum cleaned it, okay, after Umberto II gave it to the church, when it still belonged to the King of Italy, the exiled King of Italy, in the stirp analysis, they found pollen, okay, from many plants. They found insect legs, wings of insects. They found stockings, remains. They found dust, which they identified as coming from the Fiat motor factory in Turin. Those are the most of the stuff they found on it. It's not impossible that other stuff was on it too. I mean, as I say, remember before the 19th century, that cloth came out regularly to be exhibited, and they would hold it up literally in the ear, between men, holding it up. You can imagine the grubby fingers and the dust.
Wait, just a question. How tall would Jesus be according to the Shroud in terms of height? Like, how tall is he?
Oh, well, the Shroud is 4.4 meters long, and there's a bit missing in the middle, which I always laugh at because the middle of the head doesn't make an image. So if it was wrapped around Jesus,
so it was like this. But
well, then where's the top of the head? Okay, so that also tells you that these images are projected,
and it's at the top of the head, not in a flat. It's in a flat, meaning if you put it on like something higher here, it would.
There's a small gap between the heads. All right. So let's call that 15 centimeters and allow for maybe 5-10 centimeters on the other side. He was pretty tall for the time.
Yeah.
He would have been about, I reckon, about 6 foot. I have the measurement somewhere. I have the actual measurement somewhere. I don't want to be misquoted here because I'm not going to guess. But he was probably just under 6 foot. But remember the two images are different lengths.
Right, they're magnified.
The difference is something like, I can't remember the difference now, and I don't want to be misquoted, but it's something like 2 to 4 centimeters difference. Right? It's a big difference.
Yeah, well, it could make sense because the body, if you would hang it up, it would be decompressed, and just like they say, you're taller when you wake up. Well,
it's all speculation. It's all speculation. I just know that if I went back in time, what I would do is the easiest would be to mummify somebody, I think.
Yeah.
Well, we do have another super chat, so I'll take this one, but this is the last super chat, people. I'm closing after this. All right. Thank you for your super chat. Drew's DNA also found. Not many Drews outside Levant.
Druze? What is Druze?
I know this. Druze are a religious affiliation. They have an esoteric religion. They live in the north of Israel. They live in Syria and Lebanon. They have an esoteric religion. Their flag is like rainbow color with 5 colors. They believe in reincarnation. They make that. It's a religious community in Israel, Syria, and Lebanon.
Are they an offshoot of Judaism, or are they a new sect?
No, they're more close to Islam, but they're kind of a mix of all the rest. But it's an esoteric religion, so they don't talk about the religion openly.
It's a bit like Baha'i, but they don't talk about it.
Well, no, these are much, much older than Baha'i. Originally, they're like from Egypt.
I understand that, but I mean, the point is they blended different strains.
Yeah, and they also believe in reincarnation too, which is a bit of an offshoot. But no, that's the truth.
And what's that going to do with the Shroud? Are they saying that they've DNA?
No idea.
I don't know. Just people chatted it.
Yeah, I didn't explain that, so we'll just go ahead and close. All right, so I just want to remind everybody that the book, Turin Shroud, Testament to a Lost Technology, is linked in the description below. And it will also be in the pinned comment down there below the description of the video as well if you want to go purchase a copy of the book.
I'm definitely getting it and reading it.
I must just tell you, I wasn't happy with the printing. A company called Lambeth printed it, and the photographs are not good. And I have decided, in the light of all the recent excitement about the Shroud, that I need to produce a new book with all the latest stuff in it, and I will do that.
Awesome.
When I have time, because I'm busy with another thing. At the moment, I'm doing research at the University of Johannesburg on the theologies of the Judahites after the period of the Achaemenid Persian, what would you call it, takeover from the Neo-Babylonians. And there's some evidence of Zoroastrian influence on Judaism, which I'm investigating, which is fascinating stuff. So ideas like afterlife and evil and angels, it's possible they were actually borrowed from the Achaemenid Persians.
Absolutely. We got to talk about all of that at some point.
Yeah, no,
That's
it's
gonna be awesome.
fascinating.
Oh
But
yeah.
I hope that thesis should be finished at the end of this year. And then I'm finishing a book on the theologies of the Apocrypha. And that information will go into that book. That book will probably take about 3 years to write. And then by then, I think I will go back to sculpture full time. I'm tired of this.
Sculpting is more fun, huh?
Absolutely.
Well,
I
Nicholas.
sculpt too. It's really fun.
Well, Nicholas, thank you for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron. And or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.